Good afternoon. Welcome to the third day of the 2021 edition of TERI's annual flagship event, the World Sustainable Development Summit, being held under the broad theme, Redefining Our Common Future, Safe and Secure Environment for All. This edition of the WSDS marks 20 years as a platform, and it is a matter of great pride for all of us at TERI that you all could join us for this important milestone. The WSDS 2021 Mega Climate Change Plenary focuses on two key aspects, corporate climate actions and climate financing. We now begin this session titled Zero Carbon Future Makes Business Sense. This session will delve into the role of corporate climate actions in future preparedness of India's climate strategies and implementing the Paris Goals. I now invite Dr. Ajay Mathur, Director General TERI, for his remarks and to set the context for the discussion.
Thank you very much, Swati. It's such a pleasure to welcome all of you to this session in which we are looking at what is it that corporates can do to lead the world into one which has got a zero carbon future. I'm also delighted that we have Mr. Yvo de Boer, who would moderate the discussion. We are joined by a very eminent panel of CEOs of Indian corporates, all of whom have committed to go zero carbon before 2050. I think the challenges that they face, how they meet them, also provides an inspiration to all of us and to other industries in the movement ahead. And by making this public, I think they are, in a real sense, the leaders of tomorrow. We also are delighted that Mr. Michael Bloomberg, who has recently been appointed the UN Secretary General's Special Envoy for Climate Change, would join us, but because of the difference in time, we have a recorded video message which we would play right after this. We think that this transition is important and we need to accelerate it. We are, as I said, delighted that we have got such broad industry buy-in across many sectors. We started with 6 CEOs, and it's already 20 CEOs who have committed to action to move to zero carbon before 2050. And most of them are before 2040, actually. Now, this is obviously an important way for the Indian industry to move towards decarbonization. We believe that through this, we push the various pillars of our movement, whether it is green grids or green hydrogen or sustainable mobility or even carbon capture and sequestration. Now, we looked at how do we move ahead, and very clearly everybody moving ahead and putting in this race to zero is absolutely important. And therefore it is a great pleasure to bring in Mr. Michael Bloomberg, with him to introduce the race to zero. Mr. Michael Bloomberg.
Hello, everyone. Let me start by thanking the Energy and Resources Institute for hosting this timely summit and for continuing to showcase how essential climate action is to sustainable development. I also want to congratulate India on its climate progress. India has not only set ambitious renewable energy targets, it's also shown global leadership by spearheading the International Solar Alliance. And that's exactly the kind of innovation and vision we need in the race to zero emissions. At Bloomberg Philanthropies, we've been glad to work in partnership with India. It's especially encouraging to see Indian businesses set up and commit to a net zero future. Around the world, more business leaders, cities and communities, and states and countries are meeting and even exceeding their Paris Agreement goals, and not a moment too soon. The impacts of climate change are only getting worse. You see it in India, where severe storms and droughts have increased. We see it in America, where major floods and wildfires are on the rise. These aren't faraway dangers. Climate change threatens livelihoods and our lives right now. And as the world builds back from the pandemic, we really do have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to do something about it. The fact is, we don't have to choose between recovery and sustainability. The two go hand in hand. By investing in clean energy, we create more good jobs and grow the economy. At the same time, those investments improve air quality and public health, and better protect us all against the risks posed by climate change. We need all hands on deck in the climate fight, and we need more action from countries across the world, especially as we approach the COP26 conference in November. So the Bloomberg team looks forward to working with you to accelerate the race to zero, and together we can create a greener, more resilient future for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bloomberg. I think the movement for all of us to move in this race to zero is something that should excite us, should enable to learn from each other, and therefore move together on this common path. With this, let me now move to Mr. Ravi Shankar Prasad, who is the Additional Secretary in the Ministry of Environment, Forests and Climate Change. He was here a moment ago, but I don't see him now. Mr. Ravi Shankar Prasad? I think.
Am I audible?
I can hear you. Yes. Mr. Ravi Shankar Prasad has been at the heart of our climate negotiations for nearly 8 years. He handled the Paris negotiations, and since then has been taking the lead in carrying the Indian torch on what makes sense, both from a climate point of view as well as from a development point of view. He steered the ministry in the position where we are now leading the industry coalition together with Sweden. And it is with great delight that I request Mr. Ravi Shankar Prasad to share his thoughts on how do we move ahead as far as our climate actions are concerned. Mr. Ravi Prasad.
Thank you, Mr. Boer, President, Gold Standard Foundation, Mr. Bloomberg from the Bloomberg Philanthropies, Dr. Nitin Prasad, Chairman TERI, Dr. Ajay Mathur, DG TERI, distinguished guests, esteemed colleagues. I take this opportunity to thank TERI for bringing us together today on this important topic of private sector involvement in climate change. The climate crisis that we face today has emanated significantly from unsustainable lifestyles and consumption patterns, which unfortunately are thought to be linked to higher levels of well-being. India realized long before the scientific data was collated that industrialization was subject to limitations of scale and would collapse if adopted unabated. Mahatma Gandhi in 1928 warned, God forbid, that India should ever take to industrialism in the manner of the West. Today, when we are on the initial pathways of the Paris Agreement, we realize that it calls for collective actions by government, by private sector, by citizens, by civil society, and these actions are to be based on equity and common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities as laid down in the Paris Agreement and the UN Framework Convention. In the climate change discourse, the most important resource that the countries are competing for is access to global carbon space. It is important to note that even though industrialization in the developed countries is responsible for a large part of the buildup in greenhouse gases, people in the developing countries are suffering disproportionately more from its impacts. Moreover, it is the future generations in the developing country which would suffer a lot more from the adverse climate change impacts. Therefore, national and global responses to climate change should be coordinated with social and economic development in an integrated manner with a view to avoid adverse impacts on the latter, taking into account the legitimate priority needs of developing countries like India for achievement of sustained economic growth and eradication of poverty. India has been very ambitious and proactive on climate change. It is one of the few countries in G20 which is not only on track to meet its pre-2020 commitments, but also the Paris NDCs and numerous international reports, assessment reports like CAT, CCPI, Transparency Report, UNEP have applauded and highlighted the range of actions that India has been taking on climate change. I would not go into the details of the initiatives taken by Government of India, like the industry transition leadership that Dr. Mathur mentioned, like the International Solar Alliance, like the Climate Disaster Resilient Infrastructure Coalition that we are forming, which is already taking shape, the various policies on standards and labelings, on the Perform, Achieve, Trade scheme, our fuel standards, or the electric vehicle policy that we have adopted. There are a range of initiatives that are targeted to achieve our climate ambition and climate goals. The Indian industry itself is taking several innovative initiatives for tackling climate change, many of which remain undocumented. In November 2020, we organized a CEO forum on climate change with about 30 captains of the Indian industry interacting with our Minister, Environment, Forest and Climate Change. And many of you present today were also there on that day. We adopted a declaration of the private sector on climate change, which was signed by the representatives. And the private sector has indicated that it will come out with its plans for GHG emission reductions or energy efficiency improvements. It will develop annual reports on climate action. It will pursue development, exchange, and implementation of best practices and strategies on climate change. And we are hopeful that we will be able to scale up this involvement along with the kind of involvements that TERI has also initiated to bring forth and highlight and celebrate the various sustainable practices and actions that the private sector in India has been taking. For me, the key insight from these interactions have been that there is still a big gap between the leaders in different sectors and the other players in the same sector. The constraints of technology and finance are yet to be bridged, and that is something which is required to ensure that we achieve our goals quickly and we are able to traverse this trajectory in a manner that satisfies our growth requirements as well as environmental concerns. I think in the context of climate action, whether by governments or private sector, it is the action now which is more important. The actions that countries are taking between 2021 and 2025 and 2021 or 2030, whatever the kind of plans that they have, is quite important because we'll be running out of carbon space if we don't act decisively now. Many studies have brought out how and what kind of gaps we have, which are the countries which are 2-degree compliant, and India is one of them, which are the countries whose current actions are going to lead to a 4-degree centigrade world, which are the countries which have not even been on track to meet their Paris commitments, or their actions have been inadequate. I mean, information on the gaps, information on what remains to be done is very much in the public domain. It is for us to seize the moment, to seize the opportunity, and undertake ambitious action in the current scenario, in the current decade, to ensure that we avert the climate crisis. I once again thank you all, and I'm sure that India, along with its private sector, along with the international collaborators, will continue the efforts and focus on innovations, sharing of best practices, and efforts to ensure that we meet the climate goals and also fully achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Prasad. I think the emphasis on innovation is extremely important. As we look to the future, it is really how we innovate technologies, business practices, as well as consumer practices will determine how we move to a carbon-free world. With that, let me hand it back to you, Swati, to hand it over to Mr. De Boer for the discussion.
Thank you, sir. I would now like to invite the chair of this session, Mr. Yvo de Boer, President, Gold Standard Foundation, to moderate a panel of eminent leaders from the corporate world. To you, sir.
Yvo seems to disappear.
I think he accidentally logged off.
Ah.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I hope that his bandwidth is not creating a problem.
Please come back again.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, sir, we can.
Okay. Sincere apologies. I lost the connection, but I'm back. Well, great to be with you this afternoon. Dr. Mathur rightly said, I think that we're here to learn from each other. And I think that's very important given the very, very bold title of the session that we're in. The title of the session that we're in is Zero Carbon Future Makes Sense. A bold statement indeed, because, well, frankly, does it make sense? And for who does it make sense? And does it make sense by 2050, which is just around the corner? And perhaps most critically, what needs to happen for it to make sense? Another series of questions underpinning that or underlying that is really, is carbon neutrality for you as a company, not for us as a society, that's not the question, but for you as a company, a threat or an opportunity? Can carbon neutrality provide a pathway to growth through innovation? Does carbon neutrality provide an opportunity to realize efficiencies, which you haven't perhaps realized so far? And is carbon neutrality critical to your brand value in the future? Now, for the answer to these questions to be yes, really requires action by a quite complex system of actors. It requires action by regulators, by investors, by your customers, by your suppliers, by the consumer, but above all, by you. And what I hope to hear from the fantastic panel that we have this afternoon is basically the answer to three questions. The first is, can you, as a corporate, as a leader, make carbon neutrality net zero a success? Secondly, what are you actually going to do to ensure that that net zero is a success? And thirdly, what do you need from others in the ecosystem in order to assure that you can achieve net zero by 2050 in a broader context? Now, everyone that's on the panel is a very distinguished and knowledgeable speaker, but we are all going to have to stick to our time slots in order to fully utilize the limited time that we have available. We already started 5 minutes late. So I really would encourage you to please stick to the 3 minutes that you've been allocated So we also have some time for questions from myself and perhaps from the other panelists as well. So having said that, I would like to hand over to the first speaker, Mr. Nitin Prasad, the chairman of the Shell Group of companies in India. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much, I hope the connection is working okay. But I'll start my remarks, in terms of answering the questions that were asked, absolutely, I think carbon neutrality is critical to our business success going forward. In fact, over the last couple of days, we have reinforced that in quite a big way in terms of releasing our strategy, releasing our intent to achieve net zero by 2050. And equally, our intent to work with customers to the extent where we have taken on targets not only for Scope 1 and Scope 2, which is of course our own operations and our supply chain, but also Scope 3, which is quite significant for a company such as ourselves in the energy space. And this means that we need to take a look at the products, the services, the portfolio, and that we offer to our customers, but equally fundamentally change the way that we do business and how can we work with our customers in a deeper and a more integrated way to be able to deliver some of the solutions going forward. We absolutely believe that there is a tremendous amount of value that can be extracted from this particular journey. Where those sources of values are and how those sources of values can be captured, well, I think that is going to be for us to all discover as we go forward, because it's not necessarily obvious in the spaces that we're heading into. But what gives us hope is the amount of work and activity that's going into discovering this, the level of collaboration that's coming forward. All my fellow panelists and us is being part of the industry coalition and the commitment that we've put together to work together to move towards net zero. I think it all are indications of how we get there, and getting there together and through collaboration is the pathway forward. There are, of course, harder measures for us to sort of also consider in the how aspect of the question that you asked. So, for example, we are very clear, and we have put forward commitments on an annual basis on terms of what we will come back and reduce. So it is not just simply putting an aspirational or a statement of 2050 that is, although it's 3 decades away, it's very much we have a target for what we will deliver this year that we have communicated to our shareholders and put that forward. We've also agreed that we will introduce our strategy into the AGM for our investors to comment on an every 3-year basis. I think this is a significant step forward to have our sustainability strategy reviewed, our progress reviewed by our shareholders, by our investors on an every 3-year basis in terms of the progress that we're coming back and make. So we are publishing and choosing to be as transparent as possible to be able to be held accountable for the commitments that we make and the delivery for the commitments that we make. And I think that is a big sort of statement in terms of how we want to go about doing this, and along with how do we work with customers and how do we take the technology forward. And the last question, and before I'm conscious of time, it's worth recognizing, what are some of the blockers or challenges that necessarily get us there. We often told the story that, the first solar plant came up in the 1980s in California, and the gestation period for new technologies is about 30 years in our industry. It's roughly 18 years in most other industries, but in the energy sector, it has been 30 years. And it's simple math to suggest that if we are going to really get these technologies off the ground, we do not have 30 years to be able to scale them, to commercialize them, to be able to bring them forward, to be able to realize the benefits, to integrate them in effectively heavy process design structures that we're building, whether it's in mobility or in industrial activity. We fundamentally do not have the time that's available to us. And I think this is one of the biggest things where we need tremendous amount of help and support from our friends on the table, but equally from the government, from academia, from startups, from all the different players who are there, to realize that we are going to have to change the way that we take technology forward, the pace that we commercialize technology, the way that we finance technology, if we don't fundamentally change the way that we do that, we will fundamentally, and practically, we will just run out of time. And let me just pause there. And so this is a little bit of an open invitation to come and join us in this journey going forward. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Prasad. Very interesting. You said come and join us, and you also said that you're working with your customers. One of the good things about net zero is the notion that it's not just about reducing emissions, but it's also about sequestering carbon. And secondly, that it's not just about doing things yourselves, but doing things in an ecosystem. And you refer to scope 1, 2, and 3. So can you, we're already a little bit further over time already, but say a little bit more about the steps that you're taking in your ecosystems to work together with others to ensure that your approach is balanced and cost effective in as briefly as you can. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. So let's maybe just follow the scopes themselves, and that may be the best way to sort of come and take that forward. I mean, so scope 1 obviously is our fence line and what we come back and do with that, and we recognize the role that the role that we play, but the fact that we have to develop the new technologies and to share those technologies in collaboration within the sector, but also within other sectors that may be interested in the things that we do. And this may have aspects to do with energy efficiency or carbon monitoring and the way the emissions are actually come back and handled. But effectively, how do you come back and take a look at your fence line and your own operations in a way taking that forward? It does mean a change in terms of, for example, detection technology for things like methane, or the precision with how we actually tune our instruments. One of the things that's very fundamental, I think, that is coming quite fast is that we have had different business principles of how we manage our companies going forward. We've either been revenue focused or we've been cost focused, and now we're of course profit focused and shareholder return focused. But what we will be asked to do, of course, in the future going forward is that we will be shareholder focused and returns focused, but also ESG focused, and that fundamentally introduced a new set of operating principles, and which requires systems, processes, controls, behaviors, and management tools to be able to do that, and that has to be integrated into our basic facilities to be able to run our businesses. That was scope 1.
Mr. Prasad, I'm really sorry to interrupt you, but Terry always gives us lots of brilliant speakers and no time.
That's fine. That's fine. I really do. Also, so that's no issue at all.
No, I don't want Mr. Slater, who's the last speaker on the list, to be the victim of all of the rest of us. Maybe we can come back to the other scopes later. Please forgive me for the rude interruption. I hope we can come back to you. And let me now hand over to Mr. Vineet Mittal. Sir, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, friends. We all are entering the decades of climate action. It will be crucial time for humanity. And at TERI, this issue has taken its rightful place at the center stage on the events agenda, tackling climate change and establishing net zero emissions as the way forward. And it's no longer a debate, but in my opinion, and as most of you agree, it's an absolute necessity. And if I look at it in today's context, during the COVID era, when we had extensive lockdown in India, when all industries and factories were shut down, we had witnessed, I live between Bombay and Delhi, we had witnessed clear skies. We could hear about clean rivers. I remember my sister sending me stuff from Rishikesh saying that she is able to see Himalayas and clear water. As India has, ancient India always realized the value of nature, and we have always considered sun, water, air all as a source of divinity and source of energy. So in India, though, today we are probably among one of the best countries in terms of complying to the COP21 commitment which we have agreed at Paris. But unfortunately, that's not enough. We need to ensure that our next generation, when they are born in this world and those who are here, they'll get at least they deserve clean environment, clean water, clean rivers, and we need to immediately stop in Indian context discharge of waste into the river untreated. And even in city like Bombay, we have seen that city waste is getting discharged 15 kilometer and sometime in some locations almost without treatment into the sea directly. And that should be totally unacceptable from a government side as well as from any country's prospect. And if you look at, government has also been very conscious of this. They have released a study in December 19 where CPBC had found that 961 GPIs along the bank of river Ganges, and out of which 209 are non-compliant with regulations regarding wastewater. So if in river Ganges, which we worship as a country, we are not able to comply to the regulation and norms, so that means we are long away from making clean India and clean world a reality. And with more than 1/6 of world population living in our country, we need to play a more proactive and responsible role around water, around air pollution and carbon emission. And what COVID has demonstrated us in 2020 that the carbon emissions were down by 8% to levels last seen a decade earlier. But in my opinion, COVID drops is temporary. Making it permanent needs a collaborative effort. And if we see it's possible, it's not that it's not possible, because when everything was locked down, we could see this rapid drop in carbon and all the toxic gases level in the country and across the world. And the other aspect to notice is that in COVID, probably very insignificant numbers have died in India compared to 7 million people who lose their lives due to air pollution globally. And still we are not learning. During COVID, we had done the lockdown. And my fear is if we don't change our behavior, we'll have to lock down the world again because of pollution and challenges we are creating. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mittal. A very interesting narrative on the necessities. I didn't really have a lot of time to research your company, but one of the things I noticed that most of the investors, at least that I could see in Avada, are development agencies. So the Asian Development Bank, the French, the Germans, FMO, which is from my home country, the Netherlands. And does the fact that most of your investment is coming from development finance institutions say something about the appetite of conventional investors, or lack of appetite, for the area that you're working in, or not?
No, actually, I think there is a very strong focus by investment community to reward people in our industry. When I started 10 years back, solar and wind was not in a competitive industry, and today we are the cheapest source of energy and the cleanest source of energy. And with solar, wind and hybrid and solar, wind and batteries, we are becoming more competitive than coal without any subsidy, etc. So we are attracting diverse investment because of our own strong focus on climate change and ESG compliance. We have attracted DFIs because they find it easier to deal with us because we are fully compliant on their practices, process, and vision. And it's not that I could not attract other investors. It's just the cultural fitment was much stronger with them. And that is why we decided to partner and reward us with the fund to grow our company rapidly.
Okay, fantastic. That's very good. That's very good to hear. And thank you for that response to my rather rude question. So having said that, can I please now hand over to Mr. Mukundan, the Managing Director of Tata Chemicals. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much, and thank you to Terry and the entire panel for organizing this very important session, which is about net zero and what is in it for us, what is in it for private sector, why should we do it. But I'm going to just talk from within what we are doing in the company rather than talk about the general the need for it or what we see. So we are approaching it from two broad themes. One is internal and one is external. In terms of internal, we have two broad pillars. One is governance, which is the main driver, and the second one is low carbon action. I think that is in terms of what are we doing in terms of low carbon action. In terms of governance support, we have taken the whole issue of net zero right up to the board level, where there's a board constituted mandate to push ahead in that direction. And when we did that process, we were very clear that we were not going to just give a commitment, but we needed to have an actual roadmap with milestone, with capital committed. So our first milestone actually is SBTI, which is to be well below -2 degree, that to be in line with that what chemical industry needs to do. And then comes the net zero. And for the first one, SBTI, we now have a proper process by which has been put in place in terms of capital commitment and roadmap ahead. The second element is, of course, give a value to the carbon price so that whenever a project comes up for approval, it includes the carbon price included return so that the future capital commitments are aligned to the way we want to grow. The second internal issue is more with a broad-based team, which is on low carbon actions. And there we are looking at things like energy efficient buildings, process and processes, looking at process and fugitive emission reduction, switching over to renewable, both wind and solar, and looking at end-to-end carbon in terms of including logistics, fleet carbon emissions. Most importantly, supported by what we call as behavioral change. I think that's the underpinning of what we want to achieve, that there is a behavioral change. And certainly, as has been highlighted by all of us, many speakers, that the COVID has actually brought out the power of digital, that we don't have to travel around, so thus reduce the carbon footprint at individual level. The second pillar, which is external, also has two key components. One is the whole value chain, where we think this is a large collaborative effort, where we need to include our customers, our suppliers, and all the partners in this process. And this has to be done and co-created. So we are not keeping it within the company. So both in terms of capability and the linkages, we are continuing to partner with customers as well as our suppliers. We've got fantastic customer base who all believe who are aligned to this process. In fact, it gives us in many ways higher market share, higher wallet share, because we are aligned to that with those customers. And those will be the customers which we also believe will survive in the long run in a low carbon or zero carbon economy. That's on the value chain. The second pillar is, of course, on the regulatory framework. Here, we do believe that we need to work with institutions, both for capacity building, also for building institutional framework, which ensures that every company, every entity is able to travel on this low carbon growth. This can be things like carbon pricing, taxes, the credits. I think we are looking forward to, in fact, international cooperation to bring alignment across countries in the way they sort of, products travel across boundaries. So we just cannot say one country has one framework, another country has another framework. We need rules-based structure, not even at national level, but at an international level. And that's been something we've been pushing for. And we are delighted that there is a greater alignment around the world in terms of moving in that direction. And within India, of course, we are also working with government in terms of going beyond. That is to say that can you give also fiscal and other monetary support, financing support for these elements. And many, many industries have got that to make sure that they have access to funding, they have access to tax and fiscal benefits. So broadly, I would say that we are looking at this framework in terms of our achievement. We are already committed to both net zero, but more importantly, we have a very specific target which we have announced with SBTI. They are supported with internal and external framework. Internal framework starts with governance and our low carbon action, and external framework has the both value chain part of it and as well as the regulatory framework. And this is how we are approaching it. We are really excited to be part of this journey and really excited to engage with companies and institutions which have similar mindset to move forward in this direction. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I have a question, if I may, about the carbon price. You mentioned at the beginning of your intervention that you've laid out a roadmap, which is fantastic, and you referred to the fact that you're working with a carbon price. Now, since you're committed to net zero by 2050, presumably that carbon price is going to be incredibly high in 2050. And my question is, as part of your roadmap, in the context of capital stock turnover, your investments, how is that rising price calculated into your decision making? Does it really play a fully central role?
So let me just be honest about this whole carbon pricing issue. Right now, it is not a moving carbon price. We've actually taken the carbon price as it exists in the European Union as a benchmark to start with. And we are using that in our capital investment framework, where you actually add that as a part of the cost structure whenever you come with a project. But your point which you're raising now is, do you take a single number or do you see the number as it's moving up? It's a great thought. I'll take that feedback from you back to the system to sort of review our own internal mechanism.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. May I please now hand over to Mr. Mahendra Singhi, the Managing Director and CEO of Dalmia Cement. You have the floor, sir.
Thanks, Mr. Boer, and thanks, Terry, Sri Nitin Prasad and Sri Mathur ji. It's a great pleasure to be part of this group where we can really reconnect the business and the globe. Let me start by saying that for us, net zero carbon is net prosperity, net happiness. And this net happiness and net prosperity is not only for our organization, but for the whole globe. And this is getting proved now that more than 60% of the GDP has signed for net zero carbon by 2050. And once US also joins it, I think it may be 80% of the GDP, which clearly proves that one has to go for net zero carbon so as to take care of not today, but tomorrow. In our organization, as a philosophy, we have been working since last 10 years by visualizing the future, having this philosophy of clean and green is profitable and sustainable. We clearly understood that the returns and the carbon would go together. And let me just say by highlighting that in 7 years' time, we could ensure that we become one of the lowest carbon footprint cement company in the world, and at the same time, one of the most profitable cement company in India. And the contribution came from the green philosophy, which is how you use less, produce more, how you become energy efficient, how you can take care of waste of others, as well how you can provide green product for ultimately net zero construction. I would say, having encouraged by the results which we could get in 2018, when the race didn't started for race to zero, we started running and we created a roadmap that by 2040, Dalmia Cement should become not only the net zero cement company, but the carbon negative. And this was encouraged by few major purposes, which I would say, how to bring down CO2 emissions, how to create even rural employment also, and at the same time, how to create prosperity. We, in 2018, created roadmap which talks about yearly targets for CO2 reductions, 5-year targets, and ultimately 2040, we should be carbon negative. These all numbers gets properly reviewed, audited, and to put pressure on us to have the moral obligation on us in 2019. UN Climate Action Summit, we committed ourselves that yes, this is the target which we have taken, and let the others also support us, let others follow it. And our all stakeholders, including our employees, our shareholders, our bankers, lenders, they all support it. And the major actions which we have taken is, one, how to use 100% renewable electricity by deploying solar power, by deploying wind power, by generating power from the waste heat of the cement plants. And by 2030, we should be using only renewable energy. Similarly, how we can have the plantation of energy plants which are bamboos, or how we can use hazardous waste of others, so that one, we clean up the globe, and at the same time also avoid 100% usage of fossil fuel by 2035. And we're also focused on that how for this hard to abate cement sector, 55% of the emission which comes from decarbonation of limestone can be captured. So we started with the focus on carbon capture and utilization, and we became one of the first cement company to start project on CCU. And I'm sure in time to come, we'll be able to prove to the world that this is possible, and not possible only for cement sector, but maybe for power sector and other sectors. We are quite conscious that these efforts need mindset change, needs support from government and other institutions, and slowly it has started coming up. I'm happy to share that now Asian Development Bank, they have started supporting us on CCU project.
Mr. Singhi, I'm really sorry to interrupt you, but we're badly running out of time. Could I ask you to please wind up? Sorry.
Yes, surely. So I would say that what we need is more collaboration, and at the same time, the green finance and international carbon market. And lastly, I would say, I fully echo the views, sentiments which has been expressed my esteemed panelist brothers, because we are all part of Indian CEO group who are trying to motivate ourselves also, motivate others also, so that we can create leadership of India, leadership of Indian business for the betterment of the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. There's a question I'm absolutely dying to ask you, but given the lack of time, I'm going to ask you at the end if there is still time available. And for now, I'd like to hand over the floor to Mr. Rajiv Mishra, the Managing Director of CLP India. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much. There goes my best laid plans for sticking to the 3 minutes, 15 seconds gone. Anyways, as a group, we started setting carbon targets back in 2007. So it has been a long journey. I will not talk about my company. I will straight away go to the fundamental question facing this panel. Why does it make sense for the business to aim towards zero carbon future? And I would say it's very, very simple. I would just give 2 or 3 reasons for that. First and foremost, as we've seen all over the world, the pace of energy transition is always much faster than any of us have forecast. That's one. The second is, and a good example in the power sector is how come in the last 10 years or 7, 8 years at the very least, there's not been a single coal-fired power plant built in India. There's been no government target announced like that. And it is very simple. You can't find a power purchase agreement. If you find one, you cannot finance it. If by some miracle you can finance it, you can never sell it. So you'll have an unfinanceable, illiquid asset for which you will get punished badly by the investors, by the stock markets, and what have you. So I think the pace of change in the renewable sector has already taken that out for us. What I would humbly suggest to the other, and it is very humble, if Tata Chemicals and Dalmia Cement can target zero emissions, then certainly power companies and renewable companies in particular, it should not be a question. What we have to do is actually move back, look at our suppliers, look at our customers, and make them net zero. But what I would suggest is that what has happened to the coal-fired sector would happen in your industries as well. And that is the reason why it is in the business's interest. Now, I will address the third question, Mr. de Boer, just in order to ensure that I do not overshoot the time, which is what is it that we want? I think we are lucky enough in this industry, in the renewables industry, to not ask for fiscal benefits. We're not asking for any fund transfer from the government or anyone. We ask for just one thing. The fundamental reason why my company or those of Vineet finds it virtually impossible to supply clean energy to many of our other counterparts on this panel is the regulation, behind which is the tariff structure in the electricity sector in India, which is absolutely fine. We know we have a lot of poor people who need help, but instead of giving directly benefits to them, which is what we would request the regulatory agencies, our entire tariff structure is corrupted, quite frankly, and that results in perverse behaviors by the various intermediaries, which prevents rapid adoption of renewable technologies across the industry. That was my alarm for 3 minutes, so I should really wind up now. And that is really the only help that we ask for the regulators and from others. And I'll just stop there in case you have any questions.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you also for sticking to the time. I'm going to ask you an unfair question, if I may. I mean, these summits have a global nature. They're just focused on India. And I was very struck by your remark about the impossibility of getting a power purchase agreement for coal in India. But what is your view of the rest of the world? I mean, if I bear in mind that by the end of this century, 1 in every 2 global citizens is going to be an African, and that nearly all of the population growth and economic growth is going to happen in Africa and Southeast Asia. Do you have a sense that in the context of climate action today, we're doing a great job in beginning to fix what I'll call the old economy, but we're completely forgetting about the new economy? Is it unfair to ask you for a view on that?
I think it's unfair, but it's my fault. I do not have the intellectual weight. So, but quite frankly, I don't know Africa well enough. My group has never worked in Africa. I know Asia Pacific. But I would say the following. You know, what I have seen personally in the last 30 years, what has happened in India. And India's economy 30 years back was no different to many of the poorest parts of Africa today. I find it difficult to believe, impossible to believe, that the reaction of the business, more importantly, the broader public, and the investors and the regulators would be any different there as they start to see the fruits of and also the poisons of development. So I would remain very optimistic that what has happened first in East Asia and then now in India firstly, of course, Europe. There's no reason why it will not happen in Africa, but specifically about Africa, I'm afraid I really don't know. I haven't worked in that market, so I must apologize.
Maybe I can answer that. I work in Africa, and they are actually going complete clean energy, and they are adopting renewable energy at a very rapid pace. And across the continent, in most of Africa, because now renewable energy is cheaper than coal there also.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for that. I'm afraid we have to move on now, and I'd now like to give the floor to Mr. Anil Jain, the Managing Director of Jain Irrigation Systems. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you for the opportunity. You know, our company works in the agriculture sector, and sustainability is kind of our DNA in how we have been working. Because we provide this, water efficiency solutions to the farmer, it helps and allows to reduce the emission quite a lot because you're pumping much less water. We also help farmers to do fertigation, where they can reduce the consumption of fertilizer by almost 40 to 50% than what they presently do. We as a company, we are also involved in making solar water pumps, which help farmer again to reduce the emissions and get access to power, natural sun power as and when they need it. And we as a company are also involved in buying from farmers lots of fruits, vegetables, add value, thereby reduce the wastage coming from food processing and so on. So when you think about India and agriculture, it is estimated that out of about 2,400 million tons of the total carbon out of India, almost 17 to 18% is linked to agriculture, which is about 400 and odd million tons. Out of that, about 75 million tons is rice alone. And I just want to mention one example. The rice, when you think about poodle of the water, right? But we have now developed and evolved a system and technological solution where you will not see any water when you want to grow rice. And if you do that, then the carbon emission from rice, which are about 75 million tons, can be reduced by 50% or so. So significant change can be brought about through these technological solutions. And that is just one example. Now, as a company, individual company, I think kind of it is a no-brainer, right? That you need to go to negative carbon or net zero carbon. And I personally believe a 30-year is too long. And when you have targets that long, people are unable to really make them happen. At least corporates focused on efficiency maybe can take targets much, maybe 10 to 20 years rather than all the way 30 years, because that's the last date. So whether through, efficient energy, through plantations and all of that, as an individual company, what we can do, I think we will do in terms of net zero. That's doable and will happen. And it's already happening, significant reduction. But more important is when you look at the entire agriculture ecosystem, including water, how do you ensure sustainability and carbon there? And another important point, as the policymakers are also on this platform, I would like to also pose, is that you cannot go and ask farmers do less. But if that is going to reduce his income, that is not going to work. So we have evolved a system which helps farmers reduce their costs, but at the same time improve productivity, and thereby, at the end, resulting into prosperity. So you ensure sustainability, carbon reduction, but at the same time, you must focus on as much or more to ensure that his income goes up and prosperity happens. So I think we as a company are acting as a catalyst in ensuring that we would be able to deliver that. Now, today in India and around the world, we have reached out to almost more than about 10 million farmers, and even small farmers in worldwide, there are about 400 million. So we have reached a small slice of number of farmers. We have a long way to go to reach out to larger number of farmers. But these farmers together, by using drip irrigation technologies and so on, over last 2 to 3 decades, alone have saved, I think, more than 12 million tons of carbon in terms of just by pumping less water, by using less of diesel or other fuels. But at the same time, going forward, as I said, there is so much more area to be covered. India farms almost close to, between 2 seasons, 200 million tons of area is under agriculture. How do you make that area and that agriculture itself to be less carbon or carbon neutral is going to make a big change. And we hear about stubble burning and all of those things which are there. But I think beyond that, what we are able to do is to ensure prosperity for farmer while ensuring sustenance of these natural resources. And side effect of what we do is, of course, the reduction in a larger ecosystem of the carbon emissions themselves.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jain. Given the clock really is ticking and we're getting close to the end, so I'll keep my question to you for later and now hand the floor, please, to Mr. Alexander Slater, the Deputy Managing Director of the US-China Business Council. So you have the floor.
Hi, Mr. De Boer. I'm the Deputy Managing Director of the US-India Business Council, not the US-China Business Council, which is why I guess I'm here today. Just like to thank the Energy and Resources Institute and Dr. Mathur for inviting us to participate in this important conversation. Dr. Mathur has been a wonderful partner with the US-India Business Council, as has Terry, in promoting our efforts to tackle climate change and promote sustainability. And I bring greetings from our president, Ms. Nisha Biswal. The good news is that if you look at the US-India Business Council or our parent company, or our parent affiliate, the US Chamber of Commerce, what we are is a reflection of a consensus among US industry. And the US-India Business Council is actually a consensus of US and India industry because US and Indian companies are our members. And there's just no doubt anymore. Both the US Chamber of Commerce and the US-India Business Council are all in on helping to tackle climate change and promote sustainability. Mr. Nitin Prasad, the panelists here, is one of our signature leaders on this issue, and we're closely with him to help promote knowledge programming on these issues and effective regulatory change. You see this in the practices of our members, whether they are the largest producers of renewable energy in the world, whether they're the largest consumers of renewable energy in the world, they're EV vehicle manufacturers. All of them are working to reduce the carbon intensity of their operations. And that really is the goal. That's the silver bullet, as it were, when it comes to what industry needs to do to help tackle climate change and promote sustainability. What we think is the key to that is regulatory change. Once you get the regulatory system right and the incentives right, you're going to have industry follow the pathway that you want them to follow to get us to maintain the Paris commitments and keeping temperature rises to below the 1.5 degree target. Some of the things that you see in India in particular, they've had great success. The Modi government has set hugely ambitious targets for renewable energy production, and they've followed this through with meeting those targets in a time-bound fashion. You've also seen major efforts to create an indigenous industry here through incentive programs like the product link incentives to promote investment by foreign companies and Indian companies into energy-efficient batteries and highly efficient photovoltaic cells. So these are all great steps forward. To complete this process, we need more regulatory change. It's going to help promote climate finance and upgrading of the power generation and transmission structure. One of the prior panelists talked about some of the changes that we need there, which includes upgrading the grid, digitalization of the grid, privatization of the discoms, and also separating the pricing of the power that is sent through the grid and the transmission costs to the grid. This is really going to get you to where you want to be in terms of promoting access to renewable energy and more efficient practices. In terms of a final set of regulatory changes that we're really supportive of is trying to promote American investment into Indian infrastructure, climate smart infrastructure. And you saw some great innovations in that area in the recent budget, whether it's through a monetization pipeline that's going to allow private money to purchase operational infrastructure in India, create more money for climate smart investment from the public sector, to this new development bank that's going to allow private investors to invest in debt to promote climate smart infrastructure development. Given the time, I'm going to cut my remarks short here. But again, I would say that the key takeaways are the U.S.-India Business Council is all in on sustainability. We're working with our members to promote smart regulatory changes to promote investment in cleaner energy and a lower carbon future.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Slater. I used to make it a habit whenever I met a CEO to ask the CEO what he or she needed most in order to make progress in the climate change domain. And the answer I quite honestly always got was long-term predictability from policymakers. So I think you're spot on there, and you've added something very valuable to this conversation. Everyone has added something valuable to this conversation. To every single one of you, I would have appreciated talking for at least an hour each. But unfortunately, we're already over the time that was allocated to us. So I'd like to thank all of the speakers for their contribution to this fascinating discussion, and hereby hand back to the Master of Ceremonies. Thanks to you all.
Thank you, Mr. De Boer, and to all our panelists for an engaging discussion. May I now request all our CEO panelists to switch on their videos for a quick show of hand in support of Terry's industry chatter on near zero emissions ambition by 2050. Thank you. Thank you all.
We will do it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. I'd like to invite Mr. Nitin Desai, Chairman Terry, for a quick concluding remark and the way forward. To you, sir.
Thank you very much. I think we have out of time. I'm not going to say much, but to recognize what the value of the session that we've had. You've all recognized the importance of technology and the way it is developing as a basis for a sustainable future. If the 19th century was one where technology that drove growth was one which expanded supply, if in the 20th century it was one which expanded mass production and mass demand, the number of telephones increased from 500,000 in the beginning of the 20th century to 5 billion now. So I believe that our century is going to be one where growth will come from those who promote energy, resource efficiency and climate, low carbon development, energy efficiency, etc. And you recognize this. You also recognize something else, the importance of governments recognizing this and changing their policies to make it more predictable and more relevant for the type of industries we're going to have. Our electricity system is designed for a 19th and 20th century one. It is not designed for one which will have billions of suppliers and so on. So that has to change. But most important of all, why I welcome this session is something different. You go and ask a soldier who commits an act of bravery why he did it. And the answer you're going to get is, Paltan ki izzat ke liye, for the reputation of my platoon. And that peer pressure is what is so important. And what you people are bringing in is that most important dimension of change, even more important than policy, setting standards which your peers in your country and outside will expect to observe. And to me, this is the great value of the sort of initiative which has been taken by you in committing yourself to a zero carbon by 2050. And I look forward to many more joining you in this exercise. So thank you very much. And I look forward to a stage when instead of 5 or 20 of you, next time we have this meeting, there'll be 200 of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you all, to all our speakers and audience. Thank you so much for your presence. I'd like to invite you to attend the second part of our mega climate change plenary about to start shortly in the same venue. Thank you.